We will resume item 2.1. So go ahead and continue where you left off there, Blake and Mike.
You were in section 1031.11.4, part F.
1031.11.4.
Oh, no, yeah, that's right, part F. So we're talking about the signs.
Yeah, 22 in your packet.
Thank you.
22 on the red-lined changes for the AMSD zone.
Okay.
So we just finished talking about sign 1 and all the comparisons to the VMU and how it works. And so sign 2 is a smaller sign. And there was one comment we had where it was measured, they used the same measurement off the grade like how was explained on sign 1, which is along Mountain View. We don't have as much grade change on that, so it might just be easier for the applicant to put measuring it from the finished grade at the base of the sign. That'd be easier for us to calculate, easier for them to submit when they get to it, so we'll probably put that comment in there if council's all right with it. There are 2 concerns with sign 2 locations, specifically down on 126. There's some proximity, it's pretty close to where the traffic signals are proposed to, well, one existing traffic signal and a potential proposed traffic signal. So we'd like to work with them to find a better location so we don't have any, I don't know, interference with drivers seeing the traffic signal, drivers seeing the sign. And so we have some ideas about possibly proposing just one sign in that location or moving them further to the east to get them away from signals. Another one came up as we were looking through it. We know that the corner is proposed to be a gas station on Main Street and 126. That's proposed to be a gas station. And gas stations typically have monument signs that have their gas prices. And so there's no standard in here or requirement of how far that monument sign needs to be away from this monument or this multi-tenant sign 2.
Yeah, so there is a provision for the multi-tenant sign separation. It's what happens when you have a single tenant, like a single operator, like a gas station on the corner. So it just wasn't anticipated or specified in this draft.
Yeah, the multi-tenant sign requirement, is, as you read in part 2 of that subsection F, says it's 200 feet. If there was a monument sign, a single user sign, 200 feet, it wouldn't allow that thing to go anywhere on that site.
Where'd you say that's located?
The corner of Main Street and 126th.
Is that the,
But
on
isn't
the
that,
AMSD
that's not
or
in the
garden plot?
AMSD though, right?
What's that?
It's not in the AMSD though, right?
However, part of their sign plan includes that corner. You'll notice that you look at the exhibit,
Okay.
they're showing signs that are outside of the AMSD zone. So they're putting a sign on that, on the corner of that property.
And that's permitted on, from
Well,
our
that's what
current
they're
standards?
proposing as part of this MDA.
If you go to the packet, page 28 of the packet has that map.
But how would, okay, so help me, why would that be in the MDA if that's outside the MDA
already.
area? I mean, I get what you're saying,
It's
but,
their proposal. I
Okay.
mean,
So I was
It's
just asking,
unusual.
I was just asking Todd on
Yeah.
this. These are all things they're asking for.
Yeah.
right.
Yep.
I don't, so on page 28, we're looking west of Main Street, correct? Where the guard, is that where the monument sign is?
See
That where-
sign 2.
Correct.
Right on the corner.
And that's a gas station proposed there?
That's proposed to be a gas
Okay.
station.
Potential.
Okay, next to the car wash, okay.
Yep.
If we left that out, would be governed by our typical city standards, right? Our typical signage
Right.
in that
I don't think
C2.
anything that's not in the AMSD should be in the MDA.
But it's the same property owner, developer?
So
Yeah.
So there
I
could
know,
be
I'm just-
property owners all
yeah.
across the whole city.
No, I know, yeah, I'm just,
I think what they're trying to do here is with the sign 2, it's a smaller version of their sign 1 to advertise the auto mall. It would make sense to be on those corners where they're
Would that-
at. But the conflict comes in with our regular sign order and
Oh, I see.
ordinance.
Okay.
What we're talking about here doesn't contemplate the gas station. So that's something that staff's saying, we need to figure out, how do we let them advertise like this, but still account for a sign a gas station would want?
would that not be a multi-tenant sign at that point, possibly? One monument, multi-tenant?
Well, the
Or-
multi-tenant that it's showing is just the uses in the AMSD.
in the
so
auto mall,
the
yeah.
dealerships.
Okay.
So a gas station will want their gas prices advertised.
Agreed,
They'll
yeah.
want them out
Yeah.
on the street in the front. And
Okay.
so there's no spacing requirement. We just want to make sure that's spelled out.
Okay, I'm caught up now. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I thought it was
Okay.
across the street too, so yeah.
Okay.
That doesn't seem right.
All right. And then part G, we're going to talk about sign 3. There is a concern on the spacing that's required between 2 multi-tenant signs and their exhibit. It appears that the 2 signs that are shown a little bit north of 126th on Auto Road Drive, sign 3 and sign 3 look like they're absolutely closer than 200 feet apart, so either they need to change their spacing requirement or move one of the signs. So they're proposing 2 signs there. And then the same thing with the previous sign. They're using the elevation similar to how Mountain View measures it. They should measure it just off the elevation finished grade at the base of the sign. That seems to be simpler, easier for us to review as it comes in, and easier for them to work to figure it out when they're doing it, when they design it.
So Blake, the 2 signs that are 77 feet would be the sign 1? Is
Line
that,
1.
okay,
Yep, they're
perfect.
just on Mountain View
Yeah,
corridor.
I see, okay.
And I believe, do you have anything else?
Nope.
Just looking through some of my notes here. These are just redundant on the same things I had. And then there was just one question about these signs, if they're going to be on an easement or on their own parcel. And so we can work through that. It's just, they're going to be selling pieces of property off, so it might be good to specify how those signs, who owns them, who maintains them. So it's
Yeah,
going to be,
we want to make sure we're also not creating an off-premise advertising scenario, and we've addressed that, yeah.
yep. So, are there any other comments on the AMSD zone text amendment?
I'll have a bunch next time.
Wait, any other comments on the whole
Just-
block?
Just the
Just-
AMSD
just
text
the
change.
text. So we were going to organize it and go through just the text amendment, AMSD text amendment, and then go through each one of the MDAs. And just to kind of reiterate again, since Councilwoman Oren wasn't here, the MDAs are basically boilerplates, and then Exhibit C is really where the meat of the MDA is. Each one of them kind of spells out basic provisions and terms and things. And then Exhibit C talks about the actual land and the uses that they're wanting to do on it and how the design standards work on each one of those uses.
Okay,
So if we work in order here, the Harriman Auto Mall MDA, I have.
Yep, now we're moving into the different sections. Yep.
Just going to jump to
Okay, that's
Exhibit
what that's
C.
for.
Looks like it's page 92 in your packet.
Because we did the text change, now we're going to go through, the AMSD.
There's some items we need to include in here, like a zoning map and
Definitions on
and
page
the
12.
legal
page-
description, but those are,
We went through some of that already.
I do recommend in this that the legal descriptions that we offer, 3 of them. We have one for the property owned by the master developer, one for the property owned by the owner, which is Harriman City, and then 3, any other pieces that might become part of the auto mall, like Game Point or the UDOT parcel. And then there's a small parcel to the north that's owned by another property owner. So there's, as they do their legal description, that's just Exhibit A. But Exhibit C.
Sorry to interrupt, but just because, I mean, I had a lot of questions on the text change thing. So should I just type those up in an email? Because I don't want to be redundant if you guys have already discussed them.
I want to bring all of this back.
Okay,
The other thing I should mention is
So I'll
that
just
my
put
little
that.
sidebar with Todd was, this is their red line of what they want. I want from our attorney, his suggestions and concerns from that, which he says he's working on. I want that sent over and have time to use both of those to go through
Okay.
all of that for our next work meeting discussion
'cause I was
on this,
concerned.
whenever that is.
Our attorney, I was concerned. I was like, why would he let that be in there? Anyway, so good. I'm glad that we haven't had that review. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt. I just
Okay.
want to get you up to speed.
I think I'm gonna have a lot more questions and things.
So page 109 in the packet, if you're following that way, is where we're at. And my note on this one, kind of like I expressed earlier, this exhibit maybe should just simply reference the AMSD code, or just reference it, and then only list any specific deviations or clarifications from the code in this segment. Because this is a restatement of what we just went through. A lot of it is. Maybe in a little bit prettier format, but it's a lot of the same stuff. Let's see. It's kind
So
of,
your recommendation, Blake, is you have the main boilerplate and then only changes from there to there, or the current code to the
Yeah,
MSDA?
it just seems redundant. If we adopt the text amendments to the AMSD zone, doesn't seem like we need to restate them as an exhibit.
yeah. They talk specifically about some light poles in part M3. And this was just an observation that we've had in the past where we've had developments come in and they are a little generic or vague on their standards like that. So I just put some things in here like, do we want square round poles, or do they want square round poles on their site? Do they want them black, brown, green, silver? Do we want to specify color? And then fixture heads are always something to look at. So they're just design guideline stuff, just a little bit tighter on that. And most of this is just the same stuff we already went through, just the landscaping concern and which side the building fronts on. Some of the references are still a little off on what they should be. We've got those highlighted, and we can go through those with the developer. Commented on defining what a temporary means for temporary signage. They still included gorillas in the inflatables. I thought that was great.
Somebody doesn't like gorillas.
And then it got into some building standards and how signs should face. So it specified a little bit more on signs. They should face the travel way or the major road that they're on. And a lot of that is text that we've used in the VMU overlay zone. So it's good, and I didn't highlight or mark anything up as concerning there. And so, yeah, that one was pretty simple. Did you have anything, Michael, that you wanted to?
So this is the next reference, right?
Did anyone else have any comments on any of that MDA as you went
Not on
through
the
it?
That was the AMSD one, right? Yep, nope.
Basically saying just follow the AMSD zone and follow those requirements. Tiles in a few of the items.
Okay.
So the next one will be north of Miller Crossing, and that starts on page 172 in your packet.
It's another one where we want to go to Exhibit C,
Okay.
because the boilerplate is all exactly the same.
Which is 189.
Okay. So just some things to note. This was something that was also brought up in the Planning Commission discussion, was one of their permitted uses is wireless telecommunication facility. Our code requires that that be on publicly owned property. So that's why you often see them on schools.
Or quasi-public.
Or quasi-public. And so you'd have a lot of control over this one because it would have to go on most likely a piece of city property over there if we wanted to put a cell tower, is essentially what that is referring to. And then we have a vehicle storage yard. There might be a recommendation for some additional requirements there if your visibility is from the commercial area across the creek. So something to consider as you review. That's 2A7, vehicle storage yard. Okay, the big thing in this whole Exhibit C is Part 2B is the timing, and it talks about when they can pull a permit on one of these permitted uses above, and it requires 25,000 square feet of structures, have a building permit issued for them in the AMSD, which would include this area, North of Miller Crossing, and the AMSD area. So 25,000 square feet total. Are there any
Yeah, I
concerns?
don't like that.
Okay. What are you looking for there? Do you know right now?
More.
It's like Walmart, they pull the building permit. Okay, so run away.
And I'm not
So-
sure what a typical dealership square footage is off the top of my head. Like,
My understanding that that's maybe 2 decent-sized showrooms, maybe, depending on how you do it. I guess the issue after this is, as it was presented to us, is they're asking for this because they want assurances to basically get more, right? So, again, we set out with Auto Mall, we've used public funds to purchase this property, right? The deal is they get to purchase that property at a set rate up until a certain amount of time, knowing that it's this zoning. That's the deal, right? Yet to perform on any of the Auto Mall stuff. We continue to give them more and more change to other uses and be their banker and everything else. I'm okay looking at different uses when we get there, but they don't even own the property yet. Why would we circumvent the deliberative public process of zoning and vetting out a bunch of these details for a completely separate use when that use actually has nothing to do with the auto mall, right? So that's my basic premise. Second is I'm willing to look at it, but tell me how it benefits us. I'm not seeing how it benefits us. If they're telling us we're bringing in these 2 or 3 imminently, and you're telling us that all you're going to commit to is bring in 2 of the 3 that you're telling us are coming imminently, like that's not giving us anything more in exchange for giving up that surety we have in the zoning that's there. So they want assurances that they can do something else when they buy the property, if they buy a property in the future. What assurances are we getting aside from doing what they're supposed to do in the first place as the deal stands, right? Am I?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm okay looking at it, but I mean, realistically, we're not getting anything else in return. I do like the idea of using the MDAs together and having some consistency amongst all of the aesthetics and purpose, et cetera. But this particular piece, circumventing that process deliberately, really has a lot of negative things for me, right? Especially when it's a different kind of use. And I'm not saying I'm against that use in that area, but it's so far ahead of where we are. And it doesn't, and letting them do that doesn't help doesn't facilitate the auto mall. If they need to flip that property for their own monetary purposes, that's not part of our deal. Has nothing to do with the city. So what I want to see there is, okay, we're bringing in these 3, and here's what else we're going to do to have you give us that.
I wonder if we could just create like identify some metrics, like, okay, here's a typical auto dealership. Like they're on average, maybe it's this much in acreage, it's this large of a showroom or building, and kind of bring that information to the council and have you say, okay, are you looking for 1 dealership?
Well, and
Is it 2? Is it 3 before they can execute on
A
that?
couple of things I've been kicking around is, okay, well, just having them here is what they're supposed to do anyway, right? So to me, it's, okay, so what's something that gives us some assurances, right? Well, that those 3 are open and operating for a certain amount of time or have generated a certain amount of tax revenue. Like that sort of thing, that's a real measure of what they're actually supposed to do, which none of it's been done, right? But just putting in what they're supposed to do under the current plan, like that doesn't merit giving anything more or different, et cetera. But if we're getting an assurance that they're actually going to do it and it's going to be they're actually gonna be operating and generate a certain amount or operating for a certain amount of time, then that's real progress where I could feel good about saying, okay, well then the rest of this looks like it's what they're supposed to be doing is on its way. Now we can shift to the other things. And at that point, they'd be closer to actually owning the property. Like, I have a real hard time with that. And I know you can write it into the agreement that it doesn't activate unless they buy it, but we're putting it so far ahead, it really gives me heartburn.
Okay. And I think their attorney was just trying to simulate another agreement where we'd done a similar thing. It was the DAI storage.
Yeah.
He was taking that language and trying
Understood,
to.
but that's my feedback is, so wanted to bring ideas back. It's not the same situation. That's my idea is, look, this is what they're supposed to be doing anyway. We have gone, bent over more than backwards to just get this far, and we still haven't gotten anything they're supposed to be doing. So if we get some real movement there and have some real assurances on our side that it's working, then let's talk about that.
I think the language is wrong in the trigger mechanism for sure. With Jared's sentiments, where it says any non-motorized vehicle use north of Miller Crossing or south of Miller Crossing. I think, because you could build motor vehicle use as north of Miller Crossing and get that square footage. And that's not our intent. That's not what we want, right? That's not the original intent. And so I think the language in there's a little disturbing that's their want. So I would like to see that something. 25,000 might be enough. South of Miller Crossing, 2 or 3 dealerships performing for a set amount of time. There's a lot of things we could probably trigger in there, so.
Yeah, I agree. I think there has to be performance criteria, not just issuing a building permit. We've already done that as a city. And it costs us a lot of bond money. And so I have no desire to walk down that same path. I feel like we should learn from history, and there needs to be actual.
Something that gets us closer to where we want to be than we would be otherwise.
What's the buy down? I mean, I remember when I first came in, there was a buy down, the schedule. You know, what's the current schedule for that north of Miller? Do you remember that? You know the spreadsheet I'm talking about? We kind of put out the.
2026, I believe.
So it goes in phases, and it's not based on certain property, it's an amount of property by certain dates. So I think that the last payment, I'm gonna look to I think it's 2026 if you follow the current schedule.
Is it sequential in progress?
They have a schedule that
There's
they've given us.
correct, of acreage, but it doesn't call out specifically north of Miller. That is a term we started calling it just to be able to have a conversation.
That particular schedule is not in the agreement, but they have given us their plan, and that's.
Of the parcel maps of what they want to take down?
Correct.
That's
They-
showing more north then, that would basically start from south and move north? Is that kind of
They have
as
been
we
moving from the
anticipate?
south towards the north, and they will,
Which
on
makes
the, and the
sense if
next,
we're doing the auto.
correct, and on their next takedown, they will tell us, here's the acreage, here's what we're taking, they'll sorry. Now, there's nothing in there that prohibits them from going early. Right? They could take it all down if they wanted to at one time, but right now, there's a schedule, and they have been moving from the south to the north.
I think we've all agreed in different conversations that is all that area north Miller Crossing definitely need to be auto mall? No, I don't think any of us can say that. I'm open to
Right.
any number of uses there. But it's so far removed from where we are. I hate leapfrogging that to just allow it to happen and like I said, bypass that deliberative process. I'm willing to talk about it if we get some real performance or assurances that there's real performance on the basic plan, right? I mean, real movement there, that the rest of it is like, we can feel good that there's traction, the rest of it's likely to continue, and those triggers can be there. I'm comfortable with that discussion and looking at that kind of language, but just to say, well, if they do what they're supposed to anyway, we'll just let them do it.
Yeah, I think that part of what's happening here too is there's a sense of urgency, for lack of a better term, because there is, you know, particular people that may or may not want to come in quicker than others, but that really has nothing to do
Has
with
nothing
North
to
and
do with
Miller
this
Crossing.
piece.
So to me, this particular thing is not, simply
said
not
that-
urgent.
We've been given no information that says that awarding that's critical to those auto mall users. We've been told that they
Right.
need it for their own financing issues. That's not our problem. That's not our residents, taxpayers' problem.
Agree.
So I know, Blake, there's been some pushback from the development team on the language. We've talked about 3 building permits was initial, and then now we're talking 3. I mean, maybe it's the council's appetite is 3 open and generating. I guess my pushback that we can talk offline is if we have these 3 under contract that we do have right now, I see this happening within the year, right? I think so that would be my pushback to the developers. If these 3 are going to be open and generating sales tax within a year, why would we hesitate to put that trigger in there, 3 operating? You know,
I don't know
is
the
that-
timing
Certain
between
amount of
issuing a
time
building permit and opening.
I mean,
It's
there's a
usually
number of
18 months or so, so.
But I guess that's my question. That I'm just hearing the council, I'm just trying to find a way to move forward with this, but trying to, okay.
We've typically stuck it on building permit date because at that point, they've paid all their fees. They're pregnant with the project, so to say. You know, they've got several $100,000 into their
Yeah,
investment.
but again, those are the end users, right? And that's what the current deal does. That's what's in motion and we're being told is gonna happen anyway. So they want more. What we need something we need something more in exchange for that. And I don't think it's too much to ask to say we want them open and operating either or and for a certain amount of time or generate a certain amount of tax revenue, because that's what this is all about, is the tax revenue in the end, right? So there needs to be some sort of metric that says, okay, at this point with lack of performance to this point, we want to see some assurance that it is performing and working, and then I can look at that leapfrog, because then I could feel like I have some assurance that the rest of it is going to happen.
Nathan, am I under the assumption that all the black on this B is current and the red would be just the changes and strikeouts?
So in this, from the last version, that is correct, because this is all new. None of this exists
new.
right now. So the intent was to come up with some triggering language, and I'm curious, in hearing Councilor Henderson talk about opening and operating, we're anticipating that some of these may operate with their temporary facility first. And so just for staff, as we're trying to do that,
It can be, I'm open to any number of things, right? So a combination of them. So then generate a certain amount of tax revenue and they've built the thing. I mean, and those can overlap time frame.
Or the
but-
certain improvements or?
But we definitely would want to have the buildings there, right? That money in the ground and that they've been operating for a certain amount of time and generate a certain amount of tax revenue.
okay, so just because we're going to have to
Is
go
that-
back and work on that. So
So we're open to the trigger.
so the trigger concept, but so I guess what I'm trying to say, if somebody's using a temporary, would we count the time they're doing their temporary or their interim? The ordinance calls it interim facility, right?
I think that goes to what Steve was talking about with the if and or whatever, however they say it, right? So, because I like all 3 of them, right? So there's permanent structures there, right? Certain square footage, great. They've been open and operating for a period of time and generated a certain amount of tax revenue, and that shouldn't be difficult to calculate based on similar dealers in similar areas, right? And say, this is what's reasonable to expect over that 12-month period or whatever it is.
And my guess is that's going to line up, that'll come prior to that buy down happening, in my opinion,
I mean, and
right now.
that really should be, whoever the operator is, that should be part of their pro forma anyway. Like, they should have all that
Yeah.
data, and we can do that. What I want to see is that it's not just they've pulled the permit and there's still tumbleweeds over there, and now there's flex space going up. Right? I want to see that the actual deal that we made many years ago is well on its way, and that there's enough momentum, we can have some assurance on our side that the rest of it is likely to happen before we give away the rest.
Okay, so we can work on, you're okay with using a trigger language concept, we just need to work on when that triggers and what that,
Yeah, and it can be multiple things like that, right, that help us have that. And that's where we're looking to attorney and city managers who's had experience in these things. Like, what are things that gets this far enough down the road that we can feel comfortable that the other main lots around them
Want to come.
right? Rather than, like I said, leapfrog and give the rest away before the core is established.
And this just popped into my head too, a little bit of my concern has been, as I came in, I know you guys have been working on this for years and staff's been working on this for years. Feels like it's had to change based on that 10-mile, once we've really understood that 10-mile change had to happen. So I don't know that no, I know, I'm just saying, I don't think we understand even as our body, that we understand how much of this space can be useful as actual auto mall. And so I think, so as we need those triggers, in my opinion, more now to understand, it's honestly almost protecting them as well as us to say, well, maybe this is too much auto mall right now. Maybe we have overdone the auto mall based on, we might only get one new out here based on that law. We don't want 6 used. Everybody that's come to us said, we don't want 6 used. It doesn't make any, so
We've
what
also had
is?
a lot of them say that, that the dealers are gonna wanna change that, or they're just gonna transplant
Yeah,
dealerships, because the
and
demographics
or
have
the
changed, and
demographics out
traffic
here
patterns have
look better
changed.
and they move from Sandy.
So what I'm saying is, at the same time, we don't wanna cut our nose off to spite our face and give that away in a short period of time before that plays out.
Yeah.
So I was sitting here thinking, possibly another trigger, that you have the 3 that you kind of listed off. I think if there was an end user that wanted North of Miller Crossing for a specific use, and there were some metrics on the MSD already met, that may trump one of the triggers or something like that.
I'm open
So-
to
I actually like that, actually, too.
So,
Would that help? I mean, I think that would be,
something specific like
Yeah,
that, that we
something-
can wrap our head around, rather than
Exactly.
just flex space?
Yep.
Absolutely.
so they could come back and say, we
Hey, yeah.
have a user right now, can
Can
we,
always be
can we
amended.
flip this trigger right now?
yeah.
You can even put language that says.
Well, and that's kind of one of the things I keep coming back to, Sherry, is that North Miller Crossing isn't critical to Auto Mall proper. That can always be discussed later, and we're all saying that we're open to anything. We're not saying that has to be, right?
And I think that's where it started, is I think there is, sorry, go ahead.
For them to want assurances now without performing on the rest of it just doesn't sit well.
so essentially we would be creating a trigger, but also a mechanism
They can override.
to override the trigger if some
there's
some
something
opportunity comes forward, then.
That's desirable enough. I mean, it's got.
But the thing about it is.
I can't think
MDAs
of anything off the top of my head.
But MDAs are always open to being
To,
amended.
being
It doesn't
amended,
even have to have
exactly.
language in there. They always have boilerplate language that says if you need to amend it, everybody has to agree. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't be any different. If they came and they said, hey, we have this really cool thing for here, we think it's really going to be good for you guys right now.
Family fun
Sure,
zone.
bring it.
Okay.
Where's
Where's
we'll take
mine?
a stab at a trigger with an out clause.
So here's the thing is, for me, when we're talking about those 3 users that we're told are imminent, this one has nothing to do with those. 0.
Storage space, maybe.
Like, so if we need to take time to get one right more than the others, it's
This
that
one.
one,
Yep.
right?
I think our path on that might be that we try to
Maybe separate.
create that and then send it to the council, get your buy off on it before it gets brought back.
So we'll work on that piece of it to try and come with some language.
Because that's its own MDA. It doesn't have to be done with the rest of them.
That's why it's kind of frustrating to have them all like glumped and going through all at the same time, because there really is some disconnect in them, no different even in the garden plots. It's not connected to the auto mall. So I hate holding up the auto mall special district and what could be happening there.
It has the same zone, and
By
we need to make sure
attaching
that the
everything.
text change, right, is appropriate there. But the MDA that then adds additional uses to it, that has nothing to do with the rest.
But are we tying it together also for tax instead of?
I would say for the
Yeah.
PID and the CDA, they make sense to move forward at the same time. Miller Crossing and AMSD, the PID, others. So we'll work on some language.
They have to? 'Cause
I don't know if they legally have to. I think it makes sense that they're kind of progress at the same time. But I'm also hearing what you're saying, and so we need to work on that language. If we're going to change what happens north of Miller, we need a better trigger language there, so.
Yeah. And that was all we had on the, what was that?
North of
North of Miller
Miller.
Crossing. Forgot what we were talking about. Now we're going to move on to the garden plots.
214 in your packet. At least that's where it begins.
And Exhibit C, again.
Sorry, what page?
214.
That was the beginning of the agreement. Let's jump to.
And you want to go to C again? Appendix.
31, Charlie.
231?
Yep, 231.
All right. To this one. This is where Planning Commission had talked a little bit about what to do in the buffer space between the building and the residential units to the north. It's the Miller Crossing townhome unit that D.R. Horton constructed. And as we looked at it, this is proposed to be a hotel use, I believe, up along there. And so there's a buffer space, and if you have a hotel that's 40, 50, 60 feet tall, as is allowed in the proposed language here, Planning Commission was concerned about privacy for the residents, and so they wanted to have a little bit stronger landscaping standards along that buffer. So in section B3A,
Bottom of 232.
bottom of page 232, the developer proposed some language here to try to address that concern from the Planning Commission. I talked with our landscape architect. She recommended that we have some species in there that are conifers because they're evergreen. So year-round, you'll have privacy provided. And she recommended bringing the spacing down a little bit on those because they might be a little more columnar and not as wide as some of the deciduous trees. So just to provide a barrier between the two uses.
I believe, don't we have a proposed tenant or proposed,
What was that?
don't we have like somebody already looking at that area, like
We do.
an end user?
We do. We can't talk about it.
Right, but we're not talking 40, 50 feet, right? Are we? Okay.
There's a 20-foot requirement, I believe, from non-compatible uses in the
Okay.
C2 zone. And then if they were to put the building right there, that would be what it would be. But there's an option to put the parking lot there and have parking stalls and a lane and another parking stall. So you
Okay.
could be 60
We
feet,
could buffer
50
away
feet,
from there, okay.
depending on how the configuration of the site lays out.
The similar property that they're talking is I think all of them I've seen are 4 stories.
Okay. So we are talking that height and then that distance away, okay?
The other thing that we had discussed in here, I brought up a concern with the developer in our meeting after Planning Commission about fencing. Often when we run into commercial development that happens along an existing residential development, there's existing fences in place, and we always run into an issue of the commercial is required to put the precast fence in, and they come in to put it in, and the residents don't want to take the vinyl down. I don't see an issue on this one much because it's an HOA fence, so they're working with one entity. They'll be easier to work with. So, but if they do run into an issue, we allowed a provision that the precast fence can still go in because we don't want to have that hung up and then end up with a vinyl fence with the commercial use in. So they addressed that very well, it seemed like, with the.
I can't imagine why you would want to keep a vinyl when you could have a precast.
Right.
So that was 3A.
Sometimes
Just
that
that
last
section.
6 inches
Same
to
page,
interconnect
232,
them.
bottom.
Going through this.
Are we okay with the uses on these that we're talking about? Basically C2 and then adding,
So on 3A, you haven't put language in that talks about conifers or anything like that. You're adding that. Is that what you're saying?
Talking about double fencing?
No,
type
that's
of
the
trees.
Oh, the
trees and stuff.
No, they added some language in there, but we're gonna need to specify a bit more. It's,
I didn't read it.
they put in 30 feet spacing with a thickness of 2 inches,
2 inch.
which is our standard along a street. And so, we just might need to specify the tree type and maybe tighten up the spacing a bit. And
like one thought I had on this garden plot area too. Again, this isn't to prohibit, inhibit anything, but I don't know if there's some sort of, I don't want to call it another trigger, but I would like to make sure that the overflow from the auto mall only happens if the auto mall, if this AMSD zone is full.
oh, okay.
Just because,
90%.
again, we're not headed that way, but I'd love the other use we're talking about, but I would like to see the AMSD full before it were to roll over to this garden plot.
But are they, I remember one conversation, they were possibly looking at having office space there or auxiliary uses there, maybe a smaller showroom there or something. I
That was
could
on
be
the Crescent.
mistaken.
That's on the
That's on the
Crescent.
Crescent piece,
Yep.
okay.
And I think it was, I don't know, seemed like they were, when this was presented to us, it was, if we have a lot of interest in the site and they want it, and they want to have a little bit less expensive dirt, that would be a better spot to go.
Across the street. Okay.
Across the street, if they wanted a little smaller site for their auto dealership, so.
Or
That's
north
what
of
I
there.
recall from discussing these uses on this site. And then there's just one other item to bring up on this one. Our maps do show that this site has contaminated soils on it. So it might be good to just put that they need to follow the standard Harriman procedures for cleaning up contaminated soils on the site. I've talked to one of the potential users on this site. They did a phase 1. They've already did their analysis, and so they did find them, but the concentrations were below our action levels. So
That's on the garden too?
garden plots,
Wow.
yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Is that language in the MDA?
it's
Or-
not. So that's something that we'd want to add into Exhibit C or just in the body of the MDA. Just something that specifies that,
Is there impact to soil on AMSD too, or no?
no, the AMSD was cleaned up because it was part of Miller Crossing
Okay.
beforehand, and Miller Crossing cleaned up all their soils.
And what about north?
North of Miller does not have any in it,
Okay.
from what I remember. I think the north of Miller Crossing was that, I think that might have also been part of the Miller Crossing development, so it was all cleaned up as part of that effort. So the last MDA is the Crescent Commercial Development MDA.
You want to go right to the design standards again?
Let me see.
289.
That's right. You win.
Yes. Yes, we
289.
probably do. Okay. Yeah, we'll just go straight to that, Exhibit C. So in 2AG, this is where our largest concern is, I think, with the regulating the storage and what type of storage goes into these units. And I think we have a good pathway forward on that from our discussion in the AMSD zone amendment.
I'm assuming all these lots, or it's all, there's no outside entrance to the storage, it's all interior from the property or the vendor?
Yeah, I haven't seen a site plan on that, but
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
I just got the nod, so yep. Let's see.
So 2G, you don't think we should just add that little extra sentence that says, allowed as an accessory use to permit an MSD use, just so it's clear, crystal clear?
As far as the accessory use
The
storage,
enclosed storage, covered storage,
I would suggest that we clarify it even further.
Yeah, no household goods or something, you know.
Just says we think it's clear, but I think it's always better to have it redundant than have somebody go, oh, we didn't understand
And
that.
our previous discussion talked about, there were some ideas kicked around about a valet service for storing your vehicle. So you don't get to take your vehicle back to the storage unit alone or at all. There's someone that works at the storage facility that goes back with you that's monitoring it and watching it.
And limit it to maybe recreational vehicles, so boats, RVs, campers, rather than households, couches and something, I don't know.
It's pretty open.
I think right now, the idea would, you would limit it to what they sell. So if they're a boat dealer, you store boats. So I think there's just some concerns that it becomes a storage unit.
Yeah.
As opposed, which is not allowed in this zone at all, versus an accessory use to a business. The model they're doing, they're selling boats and they're also storing boats, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's saying 20 years it becomes a furniture shop. We wouldn't want to limit it to just boat storage. It would be whatever goods they're selling or using, right?
We would probably have to look at it then. I think if you, I think this is an MDA, we should be specific about what you want in this instead of, if it's vague, they're going to interpret it to the benefit of that owner at the time, and you may end up with something you don't want. If you want to allow
Asking our
it,
attorney about.
yeah, if you want to allow it at that point, you can. But if you're concerned about it now, I'd be as specific as you can in this document.
That makes
Like
sense.
that tighten
So, well, my sidebar was, is there any language in this that ties this to the anchor location, right, in Auto Mall proper? Because that's what's being sold to us right now. As I'm reading this language, if that deal falls through, doesn't happen, this could just be another competing used car lot, right? That's nothing what we had intended doing this MDA. Again, the MDA is awarding zoning without going through that process. So we have to think through everything. So I would prefer to have language in there that ties it to make it what we're being told it's going to be.
Me too. Has to be tight.
So we're talking another trigger?
Sounds like it's quite a treat.
Okay.
Tie it to the AMSD.
Okay.
Okay. Something to think about as we work through this is the elevation. So it was some of the concerns that were brought up in the public hearing with the Planning Commission. And so I went through and measured some elevations between the top of the existing ground on this site and the fence line locations along the properties to the north. It averages about 10 to 14 feet elevation difference along the fence consistently. And so.
Blake, clarify, that the dirt mound is,
The berm?
So
The
the
berm.
top of the dirt is about 10 to 14 feet higher than the finished grade at the property line where the fences are for the people's backyards. So just be cognizant of that as you're reviewing and looking at the building heights and what can happen there. Further onto that, I had a discussion with our environmental consultant today about the contaminated soil in that site, just trying to clarify what's allowed underneath the EPA's record of decision, what's not allowed, what we can do and what we can't. And so the idea with the soils is when they're in the ground, and we haven't touched them yet, we have jurisdictional control over them. When they're picked up and moved, if it's a temporary location, Harriman City still has jurisdictional control. But if they are to stay in that site permanently, our consultant told us that Harriman loses control at that point and the EPA comes in and they'll have to work through the EPA to license a repository site. Otherwise, they need to be handled and maintained, taken care of underneath the cleanup procedures that are allowed in the record of decision, which we have a manual that talks about you can till them, which is what we'd always anticipated they'd be tilled into the Auto Mall site, and the concentrations are brought down to an acceptable level for commercial use. So that's That was a new one that I'd heard today that I hadn't shared with the developer yet. I heard it late this afternoon.
Well, is there any scenario where we would allow them to move it temporarily?
We could move it temporarily to another site, but there needs to be a plan to
I mean,
ultimately.
that's the scenario that will worry people.
Yeah.
Because what does temporary mean?
Yep,
Exactly.
exactly. We need to
That's
define
temporary
temporary.
now, right?
Because this site right here was always called a stockpile because it was temporary, is what I was told by our consultant. But as I was talking with some people that work at the city that have a little more history than I do, there are some consultants that might have some differing opinions. So I think we need to look into it a little bit more with some of our environmental consultants to make sure we're not operating outside of the record of decision, because I don't think we want.
Well, and I think to be safe, we'd want it to be leaning towards the permanent.
We want it to be per the EPA
I
requirements.
mean, that, to me, that's part of that deal, right? We still own that property.
Yep.
There's a contract to purchase by a certain date for a very discounted price.
Due to this impact.
Due to this impact, they need to take care of it.
Yep.
Now, I may have misunderstood. If we move it to our original auto mall location and till it in, that's the permanent location, does that fall under EPA jurisdiction at that point?
As far as I can tell, yes.
From this consultant.
That's what's contemplated in the record of decision, that we can do that. As long as it's within, there's a boundary.
Okay.
Called the operable unit 3. As long as we're within that operable unit, we are okay
We're under
to do that,
jurisdiction.
to bring the concentrations down.
I mean, if you're really gonna use it till in, like you said, that's a permanent anyway, but.
And there's pretty low risk if you put it over with the auto mall, because that's gonna be a lot of pavement, a lot of non-access to the dirt from
Correct.
people in the air.
Blake, if this was just zoned, I know the residents are concerned about building on top of this. Is there anything, right now it's zone C2, they could build right on top. There's nothing, is there anything the city can do to require that to go down to grade?
That's kind of what I'm getting at here. I believe, I need to talk to our consultant some more, but from what I'm hearing from him, it needs to be removed and taken down to its original level and taken care of per the recommended processes in the
So-
law.
Site
So it couldn't be
itself is
capped, so-
temporary.
What we should say is, if they want to leave it, it looks like they would have to work through the state DEQ and EPA,
Because
because
it's
that's
permanent
outside
site.
of our jurisdiction to approve that.
Because then it becomes a permanent.
Correct.
Repository is what they
Sounds
call it.
temporary.
The EPA, or the ROD specifically spells out the city cannot create their own repositories.
So again, we're operating under authority granted to us from a record of decision by EPA, so they ultimately have the control.
I missed that language in here because I never saw it.
I don't think it was in there at all.
Yeah, that
No.
definitely
not
is
in there.
Yeah.
paramount to have that language in here.
Okay.
We had the same discussion about landscaping, the buffer between the uses. And so I think the garden parcel, whatever we end up doing there, is probably
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah, that was
to recommend
repeated
here.
on all of them. Yeah.
And they have the same language in this section, what is it, 14D.
Double fencing too.
Yep.
Probably, yeah.
And yeah, we did talk about double fencing. This also has the provision in here for interim facilities. I don't know if you want an interim facility on this site, but they recommended, or they've requested that in this location. And other than that, I had no,
What's the time, what's the deadline on interim facility?
3 years.
How many?
interim facilities?
That's under A, yeah.
3
That was
years
under the original
operating. And it sounds like it's contemplated that this interim facility would be part of a permanent facility. It gets added on to, or it's I don't know, it's built,
Yeah.
it's incorporated
The
into it.
intent was is to allow a dealer an early start at using the property, having a temporary or an interim facility, and then that's why they would go through a process of checking with the planning commission, getting a development plan approved, and hopefully having that all done within
Right.
that 3-year.
Yeah.
Is 3 years reasonable? Too long?
I think it's
Seems like a
already
long
done
time.
though.
Seems like a long time, but
So-
it's, yeah, it's in the current RDA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we should point out that they're supposed to be giving an annual report during that interim period, so you would be getting updates on where they're at with their design. As you read through there, in order to use that, they're also bringing forward a plan that says, here's our ultimate plan, we're working on it. So 3 years feels a little long, but anybody who's been involved with construction or something, 3 years may not be that long.
Yeah, on a
That's a good
20,000 square foot building.
We're typically
10,000 square foot
seeing probably from coming in at concept to a pre-application meeting to opening the business, probably being 2.5 years. So
Yeah, I guess
On a
so,
large project,
especially with building and everything like that.
Yep.
And it says planning commission can extend it for 6 months.
Would we want that in the planning commission's hands on that?
How it reads.
I believe that's how it reads right now. I think that is actually in the AMSD,
That's the
current AMSD code. The code that exists today talks about interim facility. I believe that language is just straight from there.
Okay, cool.
It is. It's in the black anyway.
any other concerns, comments on that or questions?
Nope. So we're looking at work meeting again then in 2 weeks?
Yeah, so we had anticipated we'd be coming for regular meeting, but we can, if the council wants to come back to regular meeting.
Word.
Sounds like we have a lot of comments to address. Another item we had is the PID. Or do we want to bring that to the work meeting, or do we want to that as well? So we'll cover all those items on September 28th in the work meeting.
Okay.
And no other agenda items.
We already have 7 on the agenda. No.
Okay, thank you both.
Thanks, Blake.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Okay, move on to item 2.4, Sentinel Ridge Park and Pond Improvement Concepts. Anthony.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yeah, so I'm here to talk with you about the detention pond, formerly known as the Rosecrest Detention Pond. We've recently started calling it the Sentinel Ridge Detention Pond just to avoid some confusion with other parks and amenities that we have that carry the name Rosecrest. So this pond, as you'll see on the vicinity map, if we can get it to go.
I think that's what they wanted.
There we go. So it is located just east of Mountain View Corridor, right off of Rosecrest Road, just what would be southeast of Mountain Ridge High School. As we zoom in, you'll see Rosecrest Road there on the south side of the park and pond. So a little background information on this pond. As I said, it was previously known as the Rosecrest Pond. We are now calling it the Sentinel Ridge Pond. It currently is not connected to the Rose Creek outfall. However, those improvements are in the process, and it will soon be connected to the Rose Creek outfall. Because it wasn't connected to the outfall, originally the landscaping at the bottom of the pond was not ever finished. It's been this way since it was constructed originally years ago. We did receive direction from City Council to look at options for finishing out the pond. So tonight we have 3 concepts for your review, and we'll present those to you here in just one second. A couple things that we did want to touch on is this pond is, all the options that we're going to propose to you tonight do comply with our water efficiency standards. Also, all of the options that we present here tonight will also connect into the Rose Creek outfall. So it will be tied into drainage where it won't be retaining the water in the pond anymore. It will dissipate and have an outflow. The first concept that we have here, and this is staff's recommendation, is concept 1, which finishes the pond with turf in the bottom, provides an ADA access down to the bottom of the pond. This concept or this option provides us with usable space, would provide us with a place to put a play field, whether that were for soccer, football, rugby, lacrosse, what have you. This is an option that, as I understand, was promised to residents in the area by the developer. So that's something to consider as we consider these options.
Well, then he should pay for it.
This option does also fill a hole that's identified in our master plan in this area. Now, we do have other amenities that will be coming into that area that's identified as deficient in parks in the future. However, this would also complement those. Some of the cons with this option is it would require more water than some of the other options that we'll propose tonight. Again, both of a pro and a con of this option are, it's going to attract additional patrons to the park, right? So I guess it depends on how you look on that. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? So that is option one, and again, that was our recommendation was to finish with.
If it attracts additional patrons, how adequate is the parking?
Excuse me, Sherry?
If it attracts additional patrons, how adequate is the parking?
That's the potential con.
So one other item we need to point out here. The property, all the underlying property was quitclaimed to the city by the Rosecrest Group, but the park and the parking lot are maintained by the HOA.
So
This
that's
is not a
private.
city park. So when we say, hey, we should remove these things, it's not ours to do that with. We would have to work out some agreement with the HOA if we're going to take over that park or not. Again, the direction from council was to work on the pond. We're using, to finish the pond out. You can do what you want, but this project as a park, and as we see some of these other ones to make it even bigger park, it's not in our Parks Master Plan. It's not in the capital plan. If you want to do that, I think from good public policy, you would have to,
Work the HOA.
I would say
and
you
have
would
a
take it-
maintenance agreement with them.
well, you would take it back and say, let's put it through the process and see if we're going to take it over as a park, where does it compete against the other park projects that you have chosen not to fund so far? Because right now it's kind of jumping in line. Again, the direction was to fix the water quality and the storm drain. And certainly making it programmable is fine if we do that because it will fix that. We're going to do that. But you should keep that in mind. Sometimes these things come up, they're in a vacuum, hey, let's do this. But you've got a whole list of, we have $130 million in our Parks Master Plan and about $25 million to build it. So when we add new things,
Well, that completely changes.
We gotta
the
figure.
Context.
Now, Nathan, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this not being funded through ARPA?
This is ARPA money, though, so
This
this
is-
is not,
correct, this is ARPA money, but it was, the official direction from council was go finish storm drain projects. So this is one, but if we start to move outside of that, I just think there was never a discussion about building this into a big park. If that's what you want to do, there's probably a process we should go through
Trash.
to do that. And not just jump ahead and do it, because those ARPA funds, if we use them through ARPA, they have to be used for stormwater. There is a process where we could bring those in their general fund, but then if they're available in the general fund, you can use them on anything. It's a public policy discussion for the council as to what is your highest priority for those funds.
All right, so what are the other options?
Okay, option two
This along.
is finishing this is the least costly option, probably the most, or it's more water efficient than the first option. It's finishing the bottom of the pond with a bio meadow grass. Now, it renders the park somewhat useless as far as playing sports in the park. The sides of the park right now are turf grass, and then you would have a meadow grass in the bottom. So this is, again, the least costly option. It's the least uniform, and it doesn't provide usable space as far as sports in that park.
It really costs
But they're-
$872,000 to throw some seed in there?
Yeah, so there's
irrigation.
irrigation that has to be put in, certain improvements that would need to be irrigation is a large component of that cost.
Is this city-owned property that we're talking about, or is it?
Well, as Nathan alluded to, yes, this has been deeded to the city. However, we do not own the
parking.
park and the amenities.
That's why
and
if we
the
create
structures
it
there.
into a
So there's still,
programmable field
needs to
with
be
no
discussion with
parking.
the HOA as to how we move forward.
Plenty of parking
Dealing
on
with
Sentinel
that.
Ridge.
Yeah,
Well, and
that'd be lovely.
We talk about in these, some of these numbers are moving these pavilions. Those aren't ours to move. So I think that the consultant got a little carried away with that, but that's not a huge amount of money. So we can show you option 3, and then I'll tell you what I think you should do.
Yeah, so option 3, again, it's removing the turf grass around the edge of the bowl, replacing it all with the meadow grass. Obviously, there's a lot of trees and other plant material that would be added as well. You can see the estimated costs there, almost 1.7 million for this option. Again, this is probably the most water efficient option. It removes all of the turf grass and replaces it with the biomeadow grass. It provides a little more uniform surfacing than the previous option. Again, as a con, it's the most costly option, and it doesn't provide a space that's usable for sports and recreation in the park. The bio-native grass is allowed to grow, up to a foot or 2 long. It's something that's only mowed once, maybe twice a year. It's very water efficient, it's supposed to be able to survive with just natural rainfall. You would probably supplement that a few times throughout the year with some irrigated waterings. However, it isn't mowed or maintained in any form or fashion like a sports turf field
Is
would
there
be.
currently irrigation in the turf?
There is not in the bottom, there's no irrigation, so
Is
that's,
there currently irrigation in the sidewalk?
yes, on the side, there is.
Anthony, back to 1. Nathan, I know you said you're back to 1. Do we have to have it as programmable? Can we not just do turf without making it a programmable
So,
space?
and I don't know why, I removed the wording programmable, I think we've got the wrong presentation here, but we didn't want to call any of this programmable.
Correct.
Because we don't have a restroom at this facility, and we don't usually program these spaces
Right.
and rent them out without a restroom facility. So I apologize for that, but none of this should be labeled programmable.
Okay.
I would go with the term usable
I
space.
didn't see that in the packet before, so
Yeah,
this was new.
usable space is what we would call it,
Okay.
rather than programmable.
See, I'm still with 1. Go ahead, Nathan, I'll tell you.
If you look at all these options, I mean, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make it and not have it usable. So I do think option 1 makes the most sense. I just think we need to be careful in what we call it. And then I know there's been some discussion, well, we want these amenities and this amenity. This is still a private park, and we need to do some work. And I don't know what role city staff had when Rosecrest went through and started quit claiming property to us. I mean, that's how we have property over in Bluffdale they gave us. We have this whole thing, but it's listed in all the master plans as a private park. We need to carve off some of this. We need to work with the HOA. And if we're going to, so there's a lot to be done. I do think you put turf in so it can be used by people.
Can you go back to concept 1?
Well, I'm trying to. This clicker doesn't
I'm getting
seem
there.
working. Can you go back, Destiny?
The heartburn I have about putting turf in there is that you're instantly going to get complaints about why did the city create a park and no parking?
Yep. And I think,
It's how it is, and it's, even if you don't call it programmable, everybody's going to do their soccer practices there or their football
There's
practices
not gonna be
there.
signs there that say this isn't a
Sorry,
city
this isn't
park.
programmable. And it is a city park at that point.
and I think that's part of the discussion that has to happen with the HOA, and maybe you end up with the parking lot. They may want to give away the park. I know some of the concerns we have with the park, the way it was designed, some of the equipment that's in there, where it's placed. It's not how we as a city would do it, simply from some liability issues, which is why they keep saying, every time you look at it, it says remove the zip line. Well, because the zip line runs and it runs through the middle of other items so that
Oh my gosh.
so you can play dodge the person on the zip line, I'm not sure. So there's some things that you normally wouldn't do as a city. So really, some of these costs are to make this pond function for stormwater. So it's not $900,000 for grass. So you're going to have a basic cost to make it function, because we need to make sure it's not holding water as well, because then it's useless. So I still think this is probably the direction we go. There's still a lot of work to be figured out, because if you do put the grass and people start using it, where do they park? I think that's a conversation with the HOA about that parking lot.
We let Nathan go down that rabbit hole and come back to us.
Yeah, I do too. Because the other issue I have with it is why do we want to spend money on requiring additional water use, putting a bunch of turf in if it's not going to be programmable? If we're going to make a park and make it programmable and add it to our inventory. But if we do it, it has to have parking. Otherwise, don't be using up all the water.
And then it needs a bathroom for another $300,000. So there's some issues there that again, that's why if you want to make it into a true park, when I say it's usable, we don't rent it to space. People just go throw a Frisbee there. If we want to make it, then it really should go back through the process so you can compare it to other parks. We're still going to have some expenses to make the water move out of it, which is what should happen. And if the developer promised a park there to people, I don't know who that developer was, but obviously.
Some cash.
I mean, at the outset, I prefer that we stick with the basic function of its stormwater. What's the best way to do that? I agree with you. It's better to let people throw a Frisbee there, but you still have to go through the process of working with the HOA. I don't have the appetite to try to take it all on. I mean, like you said, that's huge expense to redo something that's ill-fitting in the first place when we have so many other places that we do have the responsibility to finish. So, but go down that route and find out the details.
And when you bring it back, have that cost of what just the stormwater minimum that we're required to do for the ARPA money and what we need to do. I do love option one though. I mean, and then taking it over to the HOA and talking to them and making it a usable park space in the future.
See, but I look at, maybe let me argue too, by my house on 126, there's a detention basin. With all the lack of space, they've started practicing there. I've never seen more than 6 or 7 cars there. There's already 53 parking stalls here. If this is not a programmable space, it's going to be mainly in this neighborhood. If somebody comes from outside, it's going to be a soccer practice.
That's what I'm saying. If it's just grass, people can go down and do whatever, and that's not us. We're not renting it out. We're not doing any of that. It serves its
We don't want to bring in I don't want to call it a park. That's what I'm saying. I don't think we need to call this a park.
You don't need to take it on.
We don't need to take it on. I do agree about making the improvements, because if this is going to become a space, then we need to make it safe. And we've got some setback issues. I mean, you said that's minimal. That's why I'm completely on board with one. I don't want a restroom. I don't want to make it a park. I don't want to throw it in our park system. This is I think.
Who's bringing in a park?
HOA.
If you park it in the HOA, then they're gonna ticket you or tow you off.
No, this is parking. This is all parking here.
No.
HOA parking.
You're saying who maintains it, et cetera.
But it's
I'm
HOA
saying
parking.
I'd prefer keeping us out of it as much as possible. If it's grass and somebody can go throw a Frisbee, or they can go take 6 kids down there and run a little rec practice, whatever.
Your own risk.
Great, that's their own thing. That's what the detention basin thing is.
That's my only issue.
The
because
city
that's
doesn't
what
need to
the
take
HOA
it all
does.
on.
And if you park in there, you could get towed, just so you know. Right.
Depending on their requirements and restrictions, yeah.
Yeah.
So currently, it's all maintained by the HOA. And that's what we tell them. Now, to what level they're maintaining it? Well, that's probably an open question.
And I do think I think the sign says they only ticket overnight parking, which is it's the safety thing to get rid of. So again, I would like to work, maybe we do need to work with the HOA, but I think we're all saying, let's make it a storm drain with grass on the bottom that you can use. Let's make those improvements to make it safe. Let's move those, just like it's proposed in 1. I guess that's what I'm saying, do it like it's proposed in 1. I think we keep it, I think.
The full burden lies on the city. The HOA should maybe assist in
We can't
that.
force them to move any.
But let's be, they're not going to. Let's just be honest, they're not going to I think there's been some promises made. We've got this ARPA money. That's what this is. We're just using ARPA money one time to make it. We're improving an area that
But
needs,
it takes away from other ARPA projects.
But we
on
can't
this.
make it safe without working with the HOA, because that stuff is theirs.
Right.
to move, Right?
and I'm not saying, I'm
So
not,
everything needs to happen with them, right?
this needs to be done anyways with the ARPA money. I'm not saying it's
The
extra money.
storm drain does, not the park or grass.
Correct.
Right.
Just bring us back a little more.
But why,
I know, yeah.
why do all of that for, there's $80,000 difference that's to make this a usable space that is lacking in that area. Very
And
lacking.
if you're looking at the dollar,
Well, I don't
that
think-
can drastically change with what Nathan's talking about, having those conversations, who does what, et cetera. So that's what I'm saying, is go have those conversations. What does that look like?
And Councilmember Shields asked for this to come back for possibly public input anyway, so I think that all lines up. Let's do some research with, like I said, I would like to see this being the goal, though. That can be a usable space with some safety improvements.
Say, for
I
me,
get-
it falls more in line of HOAs wanting us to take over the roads. Well, we have city standards, bring up city standards and we'll take them over.
I think these ones do, because they're.
Well, I
Right.
just said,
Sentinel.
there's a bunch of issues with it that
Correct.
potentially cost a bunch of money. So can we honor the intent of it being a usable space, right? And it still doesn't cost us an arm and a leg and take away from our other projects.
So what I hear is we'll come back with some additional information.
Okay.
Just before we leave, I do have some cost breakdowns here on all of the options. As far as a stormwater infrastructure that needs to be installed there across the board, no matter which option you do, they've got an estimate of $82,500 for just the stormwater improvements.
Just the basic,
That's just what the stormwater improvements in this,
So
in this
$90,000.
detention pond that need to be added to make the water flow out.
About 10%.
So
We had
I-
looked at
I-
an option of doing some underground detention and keeping the water out of the pond so that any grass area could be more usable, kind of like we did with Olympia.
Okay.
That would jump the cost up for the stormwater portion quite a bit,
how much
And
you
then-
think?
probably 5 times.
So $500,000?
That's just a
Yeah, that's
guess
rough,
off
yeah.
the top of my head. But
So you're still half the cost of just our basic needs to actually improve it to a point to where we could do this in the future.
And again, one other point of clarification, it was our intention that the entire project was going to be funded through ARPA money, not just the storm water improvements, the $82,500. We were anticipating the entire project to be funded through ARPA.
Did this, so on that estimate, when we approved the ARPA money or the set of ARPA money in those 10 or 12 projects for stormwater, was that including this full project from this vision of 1, 2, or 3?
It does have that idea that we would finish off the bottom of the pond, so the money is there. I think as you, again, if the money becomes free and clear and you can use it however you want, this was never contemplated in anything other than fixing the pond. Is
Auxiliary stuff.
this the highest priority project you have? Or are there others? And that's the piece that didn't happen with this, right? This was ARPA, we're gonna fix it, and I think we should, but if we're going down a public process where we're gonna start adding a bunch of amenities, I think you owe it as a council to go back through your master plan and your capital improvement plan and see, does this actually fit? Or are there other projects that, I'm not saying this isn't a worthy project, that would actually jump ahead of it?
As well as just the ARPA. So what does, if that's the case, and it's gonna be, I mean, this is more than 10 times the cost of just taking care of the detention, how many other projects does that knock off the list from the ARPA money, right? What's the priority of just that versus?
But it was in our original ARPA.
No,
recommendation,
priority.
right? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This price tag was not.
No, he's saying it was.
He's saying it was.
It's about that.
The
We
$1 million
put
was,
we
yeah.
put like 1.3 million in there.
Yeah.
So we're still under that budget, so that's why I think
But there are also some pumps and things that need to be installed farther down to make this truly work, and I think those are also in the works.
I just would like to have the answers to that. I'm not opposed to this either, but I think about the dog park and the parking, and I just don't, the public perception will be, we just created a park. And so I don't want to have to retrain everybody to think, oh, you can't park there. It's really not a park, and they're going to look at it and go, yeah, it's a park. So.
And then we start sinking more money into it and really taking away from other
Yeah.
things. And
Yeah.
Okay, we'll bring back some more information. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony. Okay, item
Especially if they were told it was.
2.6, discussion regarding requirements for the development of new schools.
2.5, sir.
Oh, my gosh, I skipped I'm sorry, 2.5.
nope, that's already done.
Discussion regarding reimbursement agreement for Hidden Oaks.
Skip over it, does that automatically?
I want to make you stay even longer.
All right, so this is a reimbursement agreement for a project in Hidden Oaks. We've done reimbursement agreements already for the road up to the school, and this is just the other side of Main Street, the section of road that goes between pods 1 and 2 of Hidden Oaks and actually ties into 134th. I think it's almost paved or is paved as of today. So the work's been done, been reviewed, and this is the proposed reimbursement agreement for it. The important parts.
Sorry, is it tied in now? It's no longer dead end on 130?
It'll no longer dead end.
Oh, I saw them doing asphalt.
I need to go
just
drive out
about
there
was
tomorrow.
Connected, cool.
It'll tie through.
Unless you live on it, maybe you're sad.
It's kind of exciting. It's one of those connections, like when 5600 West was built and you could get from Main Street to Harriman Boulevard. It was really exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
So the key parts on this reimbursement agreement are how to fund the improvements. And so as you look through in the discussion section of the staff report, we have funds coming from the water impact fee, the storm drain impact fee, transportation impact fee, and then the water enterprise fund, totaling $994,072. The impact fee funds, we have to outline a collection area we've been doing that to make sure that we have the funds available to pay these back based on our current impact fee amounts. And so we've highlighted that they're proposing to take funds from Hidden Oaks Pod 1, Hidden Oaks Pod 2, 38 lots from the reserves at Sky Ranch, which has that much left over in it for this item, and then 135 future lots in the Danzy property to the west. And so looking through this is a lot of risk that the developer's taking on because we don't know if the Danzy property is going to get 135 lots or if they do, when they're going to develop.
What happens if the Danzy development did agriculture preservation and you don't give any lots?
Then there would be no impact fee dollars.
And they're willing to take upon that risk?
I guess that would have to be yes. So, yep. Yeah, there's nowhere else to pull the funds from.
Okay.
There's always an option for them to come in and request an amendment to it at some point with council, and we'd have to amend the reimbursement agreement at that time. So adding up all those impact fees, it comes to $583,800, leaving some change, difference between the two. And so the proposal is that there'll be $312,000 coming from the water enterprise or the water system funds. And that's from the water enterprise fund. That doesn't have a collection area because that's just money that comes in through the water billing. And in speaking with finance, it seems like they reviewed the staff report and didn't yell at me, so I believe there's sound financial plans in this. And so this reimbursement agreement, just tonight's for discussion, and if there are any comments, I'd like to get them from you to incorporate them or bring this back to the next city council meeting for adoption.
No question about the impact fees as long as it's limited to those and we're not on the hook for anything above and beyond. But I do have a question about, explain to me why we would use water enterprise. I don't think I've ever at least seen that.
Mm-hmm.
Why would we use that fund? How would we use that
There's a
fund?
portion of the
That's-
water enterprise fund, and Justin's here to speak about it, that's for capital projects and things that aren't impact fee eligible. So if we have to put in a water line that's not, the upsize or the new water line isn't based on new development, it's not impact fee eligible. So that's one of the things we use water enterprise fund on.
Is there that much of that type of thing in this project area, or?
Well, there's a large, all those pipelines that run through there are large diameter, and so they will service other portions of the city that aren't just related to this project. And so, yeah,
Perfect.
and so that the enterprise fund comes in because those portions that go outside of their development are for existing users to help, bolster our existing system. That's where those portions come from the enterprise fund.
Perfect.
Okay,
Good as written? So,
good as written.
Okay, do you want it to come back to a discussion or consent agenda?
Consent.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you for sticking around. Okay. Item 2.6, discussion regarding the development of new schools. Blake.
That's you. I was like, did you already do it? Why do you sit
I
down?
might, if I can, kind of preface this, Mayor, I think one of the things that I've discovered, and I think some of the staff, is we need a more formal process in how we work through these things with the schools, because there are, I think Mr. Marriott said it today, you do something and somebody goes and gets hit by a bus. We're constantly scrambling, trying to figure out, well, what was talked about, who did what, who agreed to what, because we don't have a formalized process. We've done a lot of informal process. So really the intent is to talk about how do we formalize a process so that regardless of who's in your position or my position or staff's, there's a record of what we talked about, why we were talking about it, and what the plan was. Because right now, I know you're frustrated sometimes when these things come out of the woodwork. We are as well when we come back and say, oh, we did what, when? So that's really the intent of this item. And so I'm going to turn over to Blake.
So yeah, that's a very good, valid point, is the process that we've been following for schools hasn't been a process. It's been kind of fly by the seat of your pants every time. And we'll usually meet with the facilities group at the school, and we'll kick around ideas and look at some of the locations they have and the attendance, I don't know, not
The
attendance,
best
but enrollment.
locations are in other cities.
So,
That's our standard policy.
and leadership before had really embraced, Mayor Crane really embraced schools and working with getting the schools into the city. I think that was part of the community vision, I think, at the time, but at some point we probably should have said, okay, maybe enough's enough for right now.
Yeah, well, I say that only halfway in jest. I mean, we like the schools that we have, but I think that that was kind of the policy before, is that for some reason they wanted more and more and more here. Well, every single one of those costs us a ton of money, right? And we're having tons of students from neighboring cities that basically we're paying for all those things. So if that's what kind of the unofficial policy was, then I would suggest we need to kind of reverse that. We have kind of our fair share, not more so.
And so I guess just to back up too on that, we have had a very good relationship with especially Jordan School District. We've worked very closely with them over the years and done some pretty awesome things. We've got some awesome schools, but there hasn't been a really defined process that we followed, and we haven't been consistent in following process. I think the key to the process making one is finding out what we can and can't do from state code. So as Michael and I have reviewed, and he'll probably jump in here on a lot of this, there is an opportunity for us to require them to go through a land use application, essentially. Schools are permitted in all zones, so we're not going to be looking at, saying no to the school. And this also applies to charter schools. They have the same coverage as Jordan School District does. So we've often worked well with Jordan School District. There's been a few times with charter schools we've been kind of pushed around a little bit because of the state codes and what's been allowed. And so I think a process will only help us with that. We have to review everything off of objective standards. So just like anything else, we can only look at setbacks, height, and bulk and massing. There's a lot of opportunity for us to look at off-site parking, where their access locations are off the public road, circulation in the site and around the site, and then their construction staging. We can kind of dictate how their staging needs to work. One thing we've struggled with in the past is getting a final subdivision plat for the school. So if you ever look at the county parcel lines, the schools often have a lot of lines going through them. They've never actually recorded a plat, because we've never done a land use application, and that would require a plat. And they have been, Jordan School District's been great to come in and present to our planning commission for pretty much every school they've done. They've come in and presented the elevations and the site, but it's usually pretty late in the process. We cannot impose any requirements for landscaping or fencing, aesthetics, construction methods or materials, any of the building codes. They fall underneath the state umbrella, so they get it inspected by the state fire marshal, state building inspector. And we can't dictate any or have any input on the placement of temporary classroom facilities, so portables, that are on the school property. The location, we do have some say in that, and we can impose regulations to avoid unreasonable risks to health and safety. And so, if you thought the auto mall reading was awful, the state code for this is awful, because it just sends you down a rabbit hole of referencing other codes, and so all these notes are just from going down that rabbit hole. For infrastructure, there's some interesting things that we can require there. So any infrastructure that is adjacent to the school property, it can be required to be constructed. And then any infrastructure that is required to access a remote school that isn't connected to existing infrastructure can be required to be constructed. Impact fees, from what I've read, and Todd may have to interpret it because it was a lot of circular references. It appears that we can charge impact fees. We've always charged storm drain and water, but we've never charged transportation fees. But I do know that that could have been from negotiations that were had when Harriman High School was built and 6000 West was constructed, and there were some reimbursement agreements that were in place at that time, or reimbursement discussions. I don't even know if there were formal agreements. And so there was some trading back in the day to not have impact fees charged on future schools because of money that was owed to the district. And I think that was all cleared up about 3 or 4 years ago. We went through and calculated everything and wrote a letter and made final payments or something like that. So that's essentially the notes that I had on what can and can't be done for schools. So I think, Michael, did you have any other additions to that?
Yeah, I mean, the statement from in state code says that that they are, subject to our land use ordinances. There are certain things that we can't regulate, but there are other things that we can. And it seems like the missing piece, and Blake alluded to this, is if we could use our subdivision review process to kind of coordinate infrastructure and, safe pathways, and, that seems to be the one element that we would really benefit from, right? If we could work through a subdivision process as projects come up.
So just kind of walking through a quick example, Hidden Oaks Elementary, when that came in, or Oakleaf Elementary, keep calling it Hidden Oaks, Oakleaf. When that came in, there was a meeting with the school district, and they had a different site chosen for an elementary school. And so the city manager at the time was concerned about that location and how that would affect the Danzy property that was preserved for the school. And so we quickly met with the school district and started discussing how we could get the school built on Hidden Oaks instead of in the Teton Ranch development. And so the process that the school district goes through, and I think Jordan School District adopted this, I don't think it's a state statute, is that they won't close on a site until they get a letter from the city or the municipality, if it's West Jordan or Harriman or whoever, that they approve of that site of the school. So that might have been where we should have started with the Oakleaf Elementary School and said we're not going to sign a letter for that site, but what's done is done. But, so that's a good thing that the Jordan School District does, is they will get a letter from the city saying, we are okay with that site. And in the past, the way that's been done is they've approached me, or it was Gordon at the time, and then we would all talk, and the city manager would make the decision if the letter would go out. So as we move forward, I think we'd want to put together a procedure on how to do new schools, and that first decision would come to the council. And then we'd just go step by step. Is that the site we want? Yes or no? And then work through a decision tree at that point. And then incorporate into it a land use application that works for the school. I don't think they have to come to Planning Commission for approval. It's just their staff, but it gives us a chance to identify the access locations, work with the police, and make sure that the traffic and the safe walk routes and everything that best to our knowledge. Boundaries are never decided until the school's pretty much well on its way, so it's hard to get all of the safe walk routes figured out, but we know generally within a few blocks of the school what's going to happen, what's needed there. So, I don't know, is there any direction from the council on this procedure that we're looking to put together, or?
Blake, I like this because I think there was friction with the city and the school district on Oak Leaf, right? I think there were commitments made by previous administration as far as we would be ready for certain things, but yet council hadn't signed off necessarily on those. So council's priorities didn't line up with management's priorities, so it became an issue, right? It became a big issue where if we're involved from the very beginning, we can line up our priorities. The elected body lines up our priorities to make sure this comes into place, and I think
Just
that's
having a
what.
set process to have everything documented properly, I mean, it just makes sense.
So we'll prepare that procedure. I don't know if that'll come back to council for actual adoption or if it'll just be sent in an email. Nathan, do you know how that should go if we prepare this procedure for schools?
wanna
Should it
codify
just
it?
be an email to the council, or should it come back for formal like adoption?
I think we'll make it an actual policy, so we'll just bring it back probably on a future consent or a work meeting. We'll show you what we have, and then I think you should adopt a policy that says this is how we act. So it's clear.
Yeah, I think, one word, I'd probably get with Jordan School District and see their pain points from this last interaction and see what because we got our blinders on what we saw from our side, get their viewpoint, and maybe will help our policy and procedures better. So,
I like it. I like it. I like this idea.
Thanks.
Thanks, Blake. Okay, 2.7, fleet vehicle purchasing update. Monty.
I didn't think there was such a thing as being able to purchase fleet vehicles anymore.
That's part of the discussion.
That's kind of why we're here. Good evening. So we wanted to give you guys a quick update on where we're at with vehicle purchases this year. We found ourselves in quite an interesting situation. So it's the first time we've ever been assessed surcharges on top of equipment after they've been ordered, along with experiencing price increases between the time when we've received budgetary quotes and when we actually went to order the equipment. And it's the first time ever that I'm aware of that Ford has ever canceled government orders. And then on top of that, they're requiring us to reorder them as the next model years without any price protection. And then to compound that, they gave us 2 days to resubmit those orders before they closed the window on that. So it's really caused us to be in quite a pinch. With that, we met, we discussed all of our options. We decided to go ahead and resubmit those orders. And along with those, because of delays and price increases coming, we also included the F-150 orders for the next budget year, hoping that we can kind of slow that process and get them here on time and slow the amount of increases that we're receiving. So tonight, we just wanted to make you aware of the situation we're in, what we've done to try to stay on top of that situation, and then make sure that you're comfortable with us bringing these items back to you in a budget amendment.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, we actually had to switch brands, don't tell anyone that, at a different board I serve on, because we couldn't get the Fords. It's crazy.
I think you
She
guys are
said
doing-
it, not me.
I'm not suggesting we switch brands. I was just
I am.
sad.
Get some Rivians,
Yeah, some electrics, there you go.
electrics.
I think you guys are doing a bang-up job.
Yeah,
Keep
thank
it
you,
up.
Monty.
Good luck.
What a
Move
pain.
forward.
Thank you for, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
whatever we can do to support you, so, thank you, Monty.
We literally just talked about this at the water district because they didn't switch brands, but they had to go from extended cabs to single cabs just because you can't get trucks.
Get the inventory, yeah.
You can get a bunch of used Tauruses in here, I think.
Some Crown Vics. You wanna go back? Yeah. Okay.
Crown Vics were a great police car.
Okay, item 2.8. Michael, no pressure. I've got about 3 minutes before I've got to get home.
This will be
so.
really quick.
And he's walking, so.
And I'm walking.
There's nothing we can do about it.
So this is just a quick technical update to adjust our plan to the requirements of the 2022 state legislature. As you know, we adopted a plan in 2019 for moderate income housing. It's requiring now that we adopt the new strategies verbatim in our plan. They did change a little bit. So this draft that was included in the packet did that. It also required that we start identifying benchmarks and a timeline for implementing our plan. So all of the strategies that are in the new draft plan are from the old plan, essentially. We did have to reword one of the strategies because one of the strategies that we had selected was combined. They combined a couple of strategies into one, and then they also added a couple of new ones. But it's the same information. We just had to add kind of like these benchmarks and steps into the plan. We have to file our report by October 1st. We would like to have this on for consent agenda approval in 2 weeks, if that is acceptable to the council. Okay.
Giddy up.
Okay.
Michael, I'm sorry, don't hate me.
Sure.
We were going to talk about our housing. Was that going to come up? We were talking about in that 2 weeks though, right? Is that on another discussion in 2 weeks? Or was that going to be now?
We could certainly,
Probably now. We do have to report these to the state by October 1st, which is why this portion is kind of timely, get in front of you, then approved. I know you had some things you wanted to discuss with
yeah, so
council.
this is a reflection of some of the things that you have initiated, Mayor. We were already doing or were obligated to do the monitoring the Section 42 housing tax credits in the city. But we have been talking about the potential for doing some deed restrictions or, looking at the possibility for a down payment assistance program, which is something that is often funded through like CDBG funds.
Right.
So there's a variety of things that we could just study and look at.
Let's, me and you talk maybe offline. Let's get this submitted. And you and I can talk offline and maybe we come back to a
Yeah,
different.
but this plan, I think we could move forward and then we
Yep.
can talk
Okay.
this other issue, yeah.
I just didn't want, I felt bad because I know you and I talked about presenting during this. I didn't anticipate this being a, stop, it's important. It's important.
I didn't say a word.
Your look said it all.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Michael, I appreciate this. Sorry to push you,
Nope, it's good.
my wife's out of town and I have a teenager babysitting from down the street. And I'm pushing, so, okay. Look for a motion to, we got to go to closed.
We have a close, but I think you could probably hand off
I'm
the
okay,
gavel.
I'm
to
okay if
somebody.
we'll be fast, probably.
I will be really quick. I don't know about you guys.
It's not you we're worried about. Okay, I'll look for the motion.
Do you want to go home or we'll do closed or you want to be in closed?
Let's go to closed. We're okay, I'll be okay.
Motion to temporary recess, city council meeting to convene in closed session for purpose to discuss pending or reasonable imminent litigation and purchase exchange of lease of real property as provided by Utah Code Annotated 52-4205.
Motion by Sherry, second by Teddy. Sherry?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes, we'll go into closed. Thank you. Thank you, Justin, thank you, Monty.
Thank
We
you, guys.
going somewhere for closed?
Can we go in there for
Or
closed?
do we want to just kick people out and use this room?
I'm okay with that too. Don't we have to record it? Can you record it?
Yeah, we can record it from in here.
It'll be faster if we do it in